Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for joining. My name is Wade Crowfoot, and I'm our Natural Resources Agency Secretary, and I'm really glad you're with us to learn a little bit more about what are the priorities that are driving our work here in 2022. I hope you had a good New Year's and the year has started in a safe and productive way. It's remarkable that we continue to all navigate the global pandemic and just appreciate the work across our government, our agency, but in everybody's life to continue to make progress despite that challenge. So listen, we're going to spend the next 60 minutes sharing more about what's on our agenda in the coming months here at the Natural Resources Agency, ultimately to drive the vision of the governor and the legislature and the work that we do. What we hope to accomplish here in coming months, and really what drives the work. We'll start by sharing a little bit about what we're building on from 2021. And I'm really excited to, at different times in this discussion or this presentation, bring on key leaders across our agency that are driving on our priorities. I'm going to make sure that this presentation runs about 45 minutes and then provides at least 10 or 15 minutes for questions or suggestions that you have for me and for our agency. If you have questions, again, or comments, you can provide those within the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. Our agency's mission, just for those who may not be aware, is to restore, protect, and manage the state's natural, historic, and cultural resources, both for current generations and for future generations. And what that basically means to me is to steward our natural environment and to manage the resources, be they economic and cultural or historic, in ways that work for all Californians. The second part of our mission statement says that we do that by using creative solutions based on science, collaboration, and respect for the communities and the interests involved. And so we really try to embody this mission across a very broad and diverse workforce. We're 21,000 people strong across our agency. We include about 30 different entities, some very large departments that everybody's heard of, like CAL FIRE, our state park system, Department of Water Resources, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then entities that are very important in their own right that you may not have heard of. The Colorado River Board, the San Diego Rivers Conservancy, the State Historic Preservation Office, California Geological Survey. And so it's this broad set of entities and this vast set of employees that are doing that work and really working to meet our mission. Now, listen, 2021 was challenging in so many respects. Obviously, I talked about the pandemic. We also experienced another catastrophic wildfire season. Drought was worsening, experienced an oil spill off Southern California. And so there was a lot to be challenged by in 2021. But I'm really excited to share with you that great progress was also made in 2021 on the mission we have across our agency. So let's turn to 2021. And we put together a PowerPoint presentation that'll go along with my remarks. And in this first slide, you see the Coyote Valley in Santa Clara County on the left. And that is partially conserved thanks to a project by the Department of Conservation to purchase a ranch there, part of a regional effort to ensure open space for multiple purposes outside of San Jose and that metropolitan area. And then on the right is a photo of some young people in San Diego that had their first opportunity to surf thanks to an organization called Outdoor Outreach. And that is a program that's funded through our Explore the Coast grants and our Coastal Conservancy. So these are two visible examples of points of progress, but I want to share with you some others. The California Energy Commission, which is in our agency, passed the strongest building code update in the country, one that will decarbonize buildings while saving consumers $1.5 billion over the next 3 decades. Department of Water Resources approved its first groundwater management plans, which is implementing groundwater management in California, a really big, important task for sustainable water management. We also launched California Groundwater Live, that in real time maps and measures groundwater. CAL FIRE, of course, prevented any civilian deaths in the wildfire season of 2021, despite 2.5 million acres of land burning. It also anchored a multi-agency effort to expand the upfront proactive actions that we're taking on wildfire, resulting in upwards of 240 resilience projects underway. Fish and wildlife, in addition to ensuring the protection of fish and wildlife across the state, rescued almost 500 animals when Wildlife Waste Station, which was a home for animals that had been used in the entertainment industry, suddenly closed. Our state lands commission in our agency continued to safely decommission oil infrastructure, including Rincon Island and Platform Holly. State parks kept 280 park units open and launched really innovative new programs for equitable access that we'll talk about. And then key departments and conservancies work to conserve land in California, including the Wildlife Conservation Board, acquiring 7,500 acres along the Eel River at Lone Pine Ranch, the Delta Conservancy, 55 acres of the Bay Point Regional Shoreline Restoration in the Bay Delta, the San Diego Rivers Conservancy, restoring the Cuyamaca River State Park, reforesting that after a recent fire. The California Conservation Corps launched an all-women's wildfire resilience crew in Yosemite. And many of our entities conducted important science, including the Delta Stewardship Council's Bay Adapts, or I should say the Delta Adapts, focused on the impacts of sea level rise on the Bay Delta. And then the Bay Conservation and Development Commission doing its own Bay Adapt, focused on regional resilience and climate resilience in the Bay. And then 2 of our beloved institutions, the California African American Museum and the California Science Center, reopened after having been closed for a large portion of the pandemic. Next slide. So while we were achieving this progress, I should say, our departments found new ways to connect with Californians, whether through online science programs by the California Science Center that you see in the top right, or virtual dance celebrations at the African American Museum. Much of our work, including public hearings and meetings, shifted to video conferences, which I know everybody can relate to, with the benefit of more people tuning into meetings, whether it was the Coastal Commission, the Board of Forestry, Fish and Game Commission, than ever before. And we tried to get out there when we could to see employees in the field, to announce important actions that we're taking to combat drought, wildfire, other challenges that we face. Next slide. So really fundamentally, first and foremost, what I want to say based on the work in 2021 is I want to thank all of our employees across our agency, some of whom may be tuning in today. For California, you stepped up in innumerable ways. Many of our employees stayed in the field, whether they're firefighters, game wardens, park rangers, environmental scientists, engineers working on water or petroleum oversight. For others, it meant moving our workplace to the kitchen table. I put myself in that category and continuing the work. But thanks in part to certainly our employees, but also everybody that we work with outside of our agency and other state agencies and across the state, we were able to achieve a whole lot in 2021 and build momentum for what we're going to get done in 2022. I have to say huge thanks to our policy leaders here in Sacramento. Certainly, first and foremost, the governor, Gavin Newsom, who I work for, and our legislature. I mean, remarkable alignment between the governor and legislature on the priorities that we'll talk about today. Next slide. So what are we going to do in 2022? And I get asked in this role a lot about what my priorities are. and what I'm actually driving on, recognizing that there's a whole lot of people across our agency working on a lot. And this will actually be the third year where I've held a talk like this, where I think it's really important to be open and transparent about what's driving me in this work and where I'm trying to help the agency go on the important issues that we're facing. Next slide. So I talk about 3 key priorities, and it's impossible to reduce all of our programs, our investments into a handful of goals or objectives. But I think it's really important to signal priority on the work and identify specifically what we're prioritizing. And so, as I said, it's really threefold. It's doing our part to combat climate change, which is, of course, a major priority across the state and our government. It's working to expand equitable access, and that means providing access to all Californians to this incredible nature and richness that we have. And then to protect biodiversity and our world-renowned nature. And I'm going to take a little while to break down each of them. So let's start with climate change. Next slide. So we all know we face an unprecedented challenge to life here on Earth with climate change. And we also know, if we live in California, that we are on the front lines of climate change. Accelerating climate change is impacting our lives in California. And it's doing so through worsening wildfire, drought, flooding threats, growing extreme heat events, and sea level rise across our state. We also know that California has led the way for over the last 2 decades, reducing our carbon pollution while growing our economy. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, and we have effectively decoupled or delinked our economic growth, measured in GDP, from our carbon emissions, measured in pollution. So in other words, we're able to grow while reducing our pollution. But we know that we are facing the climate crisis more urgently than we ever had across the world. We also know that we have to work even harder and faster in California. We have set a goal in the Newsom administration of achieving carbon neutrality by 2045, or net zero carbon emissions, even while maintaining our prosperity and growing our equity. We also know we need to do more to protect our people and our nature from the impacts of climate change. So our work at the agency can be put in 2 buckets. One is accelerating the transition to a clean energy economy. And we do that by supporting the efforts of our Energy Commission and all their work they're doing, decarbonizing buildings, shifting to zero emission vehicles, greater energy efficiency, renewable energy, and working to phase out the extraction of fossil fuels, which we also oversee through our Department of Conservation and an entity called CalGEM. About 1/3 of the gasoline in the state that we consume is produced in California. And so how do we shift away from demanding that gasoline, reducing our demand, but also phasing out our extraction of fossil fuels while doing more to protect communities and workers near that oil extraction? So one is this this transformation of our energy and economy. And the other is building our resilience to climate change. And when we talk about resilience, we talk about the ability to adapt or weather climate change events. And in that respect, we're very focused on building our wildfire resilience. In other words, reducing the threat of catastrophic wildfire, building our resilience to drought, which we continue to be in, and the flooding threats, to build community resilience to these extreme heat events that are increasingly being experienced, and then to prepare and to plan and to protect our communities and our natural systems from sea level rise and all that will entail. Next slide. Now, we are blessed with remarkable resources to actually take on climate change. Last Monday, Governor Newsom proposed for this coming annual budget year, spending $22.5 billion combating climate change. This is a historic amount of funding, certainly that's never been proposed before. And it would fund not only work like electrifying or creating more access to zero emission vehicles and decarbonizing buildings in our agency, but also new broader investments in housing, in health, in education, in our universities, all focused on combating climate change and transitioning our economy while building equity. And I'm really, really proud of this proposal, which will now be discussed in the legislature in coming months. And if you would, next slide. This builds on an agreement that the legislature and the governor reached last summer to spend $15 billion now on climate change. So we have a historic budget agreement last year, $15 billion. Governor's proposed over $22 billion for this coming budget year. So we could be looking at almost $40 billion of spending to combat climate change and do so in a way that's going to maintain economic prosperity and build equity. And that's a pretty incredible opportunity and one that I think almost nowhere in the world is actually investing in. Next slide. So what are we doing at the Resources Agency given this opportunity, but also the challenge? And I'll boil it down to really sort of three key actions I'm focused on. One is executing on this historic budget, turning these investments that our leaders have allocated into visible progress, protecting communities from things like wildfire, responding to drought, getting more zero emission vehicles across California, particularly in underserved communities, continuing to phase down oil production and protect communities. And so I'm focused with our team within our office, but also our departments on understanding from them, driving them to allocate funding for improvements across the state as quickly as we can. We need to make sure that those are thoughtful investments, that they're effective investments, but we're really focused on treating the climate crisis as the crisis it is. And it's really executing on this historic budget. And the case I'll make is that we can go back to our policy leaders and identify more funding needs once we actually spend these resources. So really appreciate partnerships with and building out programs to spend these resources. We've also developed a set of guiding strategies to direct this investment and all of our work. At the end of the day, there's a whole lot of things that we could do to take climate action, and we need to be strategic about this. So we built strategies to focus what we're going to do in state government, where we're going to invest. Things like the water resilience portfolio that we came up with over the last couple of years at direction of Governor Newsom. Things like the Wildfire Resilience Action Plan, similarly focused, comprehensive strategy from the Newsom administration. This past year, we are updating the Extreme Heat Action Plan, focused on how to combat extreme heat. And we are finalizing the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy around how we utilize land, improve our management of natural and working lands for climate purposes. All of this is one key umbrella is our update to our climate adaptation strategy for the state. In other words, identifying the priorities for us to adapt to climate change and build our resilience. Now, look, a lot of government plans, strategies, studies sit on a shelf, and it's our goal to ensure that these strategies are outcomes focused, really transparent about the work that we're going to do, and truly guide the investments that we're going to make. So a big priority of mine this year is to breathe the life into those strategies, to make sure those strategies have actionable outcomes that we can achieve and then drive towards those outcomes. And then the third bucket is building the capacity of local and regional groups to get this work done. We know climate resilience in California is regionalized. In other words, the climate challenges and the opportunities that exist in the north coast of the state are very different than those that exist in urban Southern California or the Central Valley. We can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to climate action in the state. we really need to support regional leaders, local leaders that are identifying what those communities need to do to transition to clean energy, but also to protect themselves from climate change. And so we are really focused on building capacity of regional and local coalitions to get this work done. And at this point, I'd like to invite my first guest onto this discussion, and that's Angie Avery. Angie leads our Sierra Nevada Conservancy, which is one of 10 state conservancies under state law that are really on the front lines of implementing our policies and investments here at the Natural Resources Agency. And Angie, the Sierra Nevada Conservancy obviously focused on this incredible mountain range in our state and the region of the mountain range, has been doing some really interesting work partnering with other entities to build wildfire resilience. And that's one of these components of climate resilience that I talked about. So would love to hear from you an example or two of projects that actually you're implementing thanks to our state investments to build wildfire resilience in the Sierra Nevada.
Sure, great. Thanks, Wade. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thrilled to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing that really is in a direct alignment, I think, with the priorities that you just laid out, but also the ways that you're talking about implementing them. You said it really well. Climate resilience really is the ability to prepare for, to recover from, and to adapt to the impacts of changing climate. And you also said that there's no silver bullet when it comes to the building the activities that, or a single set of answers when it comes to building the activities that you need to respond. When we, the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, are thinking about how to build climate resilience and the projects that we really sort of stand behind and how we organize them, we really recognize that climate resilience activities really vary. They vary disparately, significantly from place to place on the landscape. And the activities that you pull together really need to be developed based on local conditions, the skills, abilities, the resources, the local capacity of the groups that are working on a specific landscape. So one of the examples of a regional approach that SNC has undertaken that many folks have heard about over the years because it's been around for a little bit is the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative area. And what this sort of regional approach is a multi-stakeholder public-private partnership that was pulled together in response to the changes on the landscape that we saw coming our way. It was pulled together after the Rim Fire and the King Fire. And so the SNC and the people that we partner with across this particular region were really concerned about the trajectory that we were looking at and decided that we needed to really come together in a different way to test innovation, to test game changers, to really think about how we get to action more quickly with the funding that was available to us. And so the TCSI really was the result of that sort of drive to do something a little bit different on the landscape and to organize in a different way so that we could really do as much as we possibly could, share the workload across our partners, to really sort of build climate resilience on that particular landscape in response to the specific needs on that landscape. So for us, the TCSI has been a model as we think about a regional approach that embodies a variety of resilience perspectives and mobilizes local groups who are already working, who live and have very close heartfelt connection to the place that they're thinking about protecting. So how do we use the lessons that we've learned from TCSI and bring those out across the 27 million acre region that we serve? So it's been a real model for us as we think about sort of specifically what you're talking about.
That's great. And maybe if you would just give an example of a recent project. I've heard of this French Meadows project or the Caples Prescribed Fire, maybe one of those just to talk about how the work touches the ground.
Sure, absolutely. To think about the regional landscape, a 2.5 million or a 3 million acre landscape it's a pretty large area to do a lot of work on really quickly. And so when you think about a regional perspective, or when we think about how we partner with people who are working on large landscape projects. So both the Caples Prescribed Burn and the French Meadows projects are examples of large landscape scale projects that are actually working now. And I think in the case of the Cable's Prescribed Fire project, we saw real impacts and positive results of that work in and amongst the tragedy of the Caldor fire this year. But the French Meadows project, I think, is a really good example of a multi-benefit project that is linking together a bunch of different objectives and really trying to build climate resilience on the ground. So this project is located on the upper headwaters of the Middle Fork of the American River around the French Meadows Reservoir. The project itself was initiated after the King Fire in 2014, where we saw some pretty devastating impacts of that fire on forest health, on downstream water users, on water quality, water quantity, and habitat, that kind of thing. And so the French Meadows project was designed to avoid similar outcomes. What's interesting about the French Meadows project, I think, is that it really is linking together in a meaningful way on the ground with multiple partners from a variety of sectors, wildfire resilience through fuels reduction and prescribed fire, forest health resilience, and resilience to insect and disease outbreaks and drought and other climate stressors. The project is working hard to protect water supply for downstream users. It's stabilizing carbon stores into the future by reducing the risk of high severity fire. And really, it's thinking about how you connect people to place by improving access by building trails around the reservoir and improving campground accessibility there. So I think it's a good example of a multi-benefit project that brings those local coalitions of groups together. And I think is an example of how we want to move forward across our region and hopefully the state.
That's awesome. Thank you, Angie, for this brief cameo. And there are projects like that happening across the state. And I thought it was important to just zero in on an entity like the Conservancy that's thinking at the regional level, but also implementing projects at the local level. So next, I'm going to turn to that second priority I referenced, which is to expand equitable access, both to the outdoors and our culture and history. You know, I think one of the great points of progress in California, and particularly state government in the last several years, has been elevating the critical importance of achieving equity across our state, recognizing while we have tremendous prosperity and opportunity in the state, it is fundamentally unequally experienced. And that exists in the work that we do. We have this incredible nature and outdoors in California, but a lot of Californians can't access it for a lot of reasons. And so we're focused on building an outdoors for all. Next slide. Through actions like what we were so excited to announce last month with Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, which is the state's investment and specifically state parks investment of over $500 million to create 112 park projects across the state. The vast majority located in underinvested communities, many of which haven't even had a community park built in their community. This is an example of what we need to do more of to actually achieve equitable access. Next slide. So over the next year, we're focused, and I'm focused on a few different aspects of this. One is improving the story we tell about California and how we tell our story, ensuring that all Californians see themselves in our parks and in our cultural and historical sites. Driving new pilots and new programs to actually break down the barriers that are keeping some Californians from enjoying what other Californians enjoy on a daily basis. Integrating this equitable access more centrally into the more traditional environmental programs that we have. So when we have projects like Angie mentioned, French Meadows Restoration Project, it focuses on expanding access as well. And then lastly, building out this Outdoors for All initiative. So taking what we're doing right now, which are several different things, and putting them into a cohesive strategy and initiative. And I'm excited to welcome Armando Quintero to the discussion. Armando serves as our leader of state parks in the state and has been a driving force in his year and a half here on expanding equitable access. And Armando, you've got a lot you could talk about at state parks, but I'm just interested in what you're most excited about in terms of what your team at state parks is driving on toward equitable access.
Thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot. And it's so good to be joining all of you today. And, you know, the last 2 years have really challenged us to really come up with resilient responses to what we face. And the idea of access for all is like a perfect framework to help all of us in literally being able to connect with what I think of as essential landscapes. For many Californians, these essential landscapes are not close to home. 6 out of 10 Californians don't have a park nearby. So we're challenged because in California, we have 280 state parks, 300 miles of the coastline is managed by state parks, and there's parks spread out throughout the state. But we have a challenge, and that is in this time of COVID, how do we create access to these places where people can't always get to easily? And how do we also create experiences in the out of doors for folks who cannot travel to these parks? So there's a couple of things that I'm really thrilled about. One of them, which Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, is the $548 million in grants to create local parks. Literally, of the 112 municipalities that were recipients of these monies, 50 of them had no park facilities for their communities. And I'm talking about remote communities that now are going to get athletic fields, a recreation center, skate parks, picnic areas for their families. And it's really just a game changer. And one of the things that thrills me about that sort of program is that it literally creates a state park investment in a community. So they hopefully recognize that they too are the owners of all these parks across the state. And when we met with many of these recipients a little over a month ago, it was literally one of the most emotional, heart-lifting experiences that I've had in my career in parks. Really an astonishing program. And there are links that are going to be put up online that you can take a look at that'll connect you to these various programs. We have a number of other grants that go to communities from boating and waterways, from our off-highway vehicle program, and also from the Office of Historic Preservation. So how do we achieve the challenge or meet the challenge to getting students into parks when they couldn't travel? Years ago, 15 years ago, state parks created something called PORTS, Parks Online Resources for Teachers and Students. And what happens there is teachers can connect with a park ranger who is a naturalist or a historian, who can then link up with the classroom live and literally transmit a live interaction with the resources at the park and students in their classroom or students that were at home. And one of the really unique capabilities there, as an example, is we actually have diving rangers, scuba divers, who are park rangers that do work underwater. And at Point Lobos State Park down in the Monterey area, we actually had park rangers who could connect live with students in their classrooms and their homes. And the park rangers were on the bottom of the ocean and could literally lift objects and put them to the camera where the students could ask questions about what's that big orange sea star. It was just a really amazing, I think, experience that literally allowed students to reach out and engage with these places. All of these interactions are actually available online. You can go look at them. And one of the real amazing milestones that we reached this year is we reached our millionth student through this program. That's just really amazing. And one more thing, Wade, and then I'll have you ask any questions. And that is, we also announced a program just several weeks ago called the Fourth Grade Adventure Pass. And a student can go online, a fourth grader, go online, register, and for free get a family adventure pass where for a year, they can take their families for free to any of the 19 state parks that are participants in this program. We have educators that are specifically trained to work with those students and their families. And just this week, in just 7 weeks, we hit our 10,000th student registering for the program. I mean, the engagement, the interest in the public, the sense of ownership,
That's amazing.
It's our California, the collective, it's your California, and it's so great to see that.
Totally. And I understand you have another pilot underway to potentially have park passes actually be able to be checked out of public libraries as well as another way of providing free access. I want to ask you briefly, Armando. I understand that that your commission has renamed a state park in the northern part of the state, and you talk a little bit about that movement and what may be to come given the governor's budget proposal.
Great. Well, as we re-examine our past, one of the things that's really important is that there are places in California that have had traditional names for thousands of years. And you actually bring up something that I love to think about, and that is that California's parks are for everyone and should reflect the stories of everyone, whether they are first or whether you are first generation Californian or even 300th generation Californian. In fact, right behind me, what you're looking at here is a park that used to be called by another name. It is now called Sumeg, which is the name of a North Coast park, which actually has had that name since before anyone can remember. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking at state parks. And also mention one other park down in next to Old Town San Diego. There's a park, and the name of that park is Lipe Tipai Kumeyai Mut Ni Hepok. That's another language, isn't it? It's a Kumeyaay language, and it means land of the first people. And the beauty of that is there were hundreds of languages in California before it became what we now call California. And state parks has the opportunity not only to reveal another language like Spanish or another language when you think of a foreign language, but actually think of this as a new domestic language. We have hundreds of domestic languages in the state, and that's the kind of access that we hope to create and bring to the public in these parks.
Amazing, Armando. And I know the governor has within his proposal funding to enable the review of names across the state park system. So huge thanks to all that you and your team are doing, driving this effort. Excited for shared progress to come.
It's an honor.
Thanks, Armando. I just know that my colleague Mark is putting in the chat as our colleagues are bringing up examples of with web-based links where you can find out more information. So then on to our third priority, and that's to protect this incredible natural richness and biodiversity that we have in our nature. Next slide. You know, many people in the US and even in California don't understand just the unique biodiversity in California. And by biodiversity, we mean the diversity of life forms, the different types of plants and animals and other life forms. California is considered one of 36 biodiversity hotspots in the world as a result of its diversity of natural life. And you see it in this is essentially a heat map of biodiversity, showing you where the most biodiverse regions of the country are. And you see just how biodiverse California is. Next slide. Interestingly, you know, biodiversity can be found across landscapes. So a lot of people think it can, you know, they definitely associate it with big natural areas like the view on the left, but we also find biodiversities in our cities and in our working lands, including in this place, grazing lands, and of course on our coast. So what are we going to do to lift up biodiversity and protect nature over the next year? Next slide. I'm focused on 5 areas. One is finalizing our strategy to achieve the governor's target of 30 by 30, which is conserving 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. We're getting public input on a draft we have right now, and my goal is to finalize that, but also begin implementing that in earnest. We're going to continue our progress conserving lands like so many of our conservancies and the Wildlife Conservation Board do so effectively. We need to prioritize restoring fish populations. This is an area, particularly as it relates to some salmon species, where we're really challenged. And we're essentially in the emergency room with some of our endangered species, focused on ensuring their survivability. So we obviously need to focus on that. And then we're going to continue cutting the green tape, which is my way of saying making it easier and more cost-effective and faster to do environmental restoration in the state. We have a whole effort underway to make those environmental restoration projects come on more quickly. And then to really lift up nature as a solution and what we call nature-based solutions to challenges across government. For so long, our society has thought the answer is technology or human-built infrastructure. And what we're realizing is reintegrating nature across our state addresses issues. For example, restoring seasonal floodplains to address flooding risk. So really excited with the work that we're getting done along within this priority, and recognizing we have a lot of work to do. And I'm excited to welcome on the screen now my colleague from the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, and Rory Skay. And Rory serves as Chief Deputy Director for that conservancy. And when I fly southwest into Metro LA, Rory, I'm always amazed at just these green mountains, a lot of which your conservancy stewards and has saved. But I'm interested in a couple of projects that, just to briefly highlight, that are advancing biodiversity. One is this acquisition of what's known as Triangle Ranch, and the other is the development of what could be the world's largest wildlife crossing, which we're calling Liberty Crossing. So Rory, can you just give us a thumbnail sketch of a couple of those projects and how they figure into preserving biodiversity in Southern California?
Certainly, Secretary Crowfoot. So Triangle Ranch is a multi-year project. It's a big parcel of land, 350 acres total, that lies just south of the 101 freeway, just near the city of Agoura Hills. And it's sometimes been billed as the gateway to the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. It was also the site of, it burned through in the Woolsey fire in 2018. But after many years of trying, we were able to, in 2018, acquire the first 3 phases, the first 170 acres. And the last 150 acres was very elusive. This had an approved tentative tract map for a step out subdivision that would have been smack dab in the middle of both a wildlife habitat linkage, a fire corridor. It was very, very stressful to try and get those last funds to make it happen. But it contains several blue line streams, western pond turtle, several federally listed plant species, including Lyon's penniquita. And it obviously is home for all the complement of mammals and reptiles in the Santa Monica Mountains. And it's also very close by, immediately west of the proposed, well, not proposed, the actually in progress, Liberty Canyon Wildlife Bridge, now called the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing. And that's one that's very exciting for the agents. In fact, Caltrans, it's a partnership with Caltrans and one of the Conservancy's joint powers authorities, the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority. Caltrans has gone out to bid for the construction. We're hoping to break ground sometime in this spring, and onward and upward. And it's not just a bridge for mountain lions, which is our target species, our apex predator in the Santa Monica Mountains, which is really under threat for genetic problems and getting roadkill all the time on the freeways and highways. But it will also provide a linkage. We're essentially reconnecting habitats on the south side of the 101 in the Santa Monica Mountains and the north side of the 101 for the Simi Hills. So it will, in the long range planning, it will actually provide a linkage between animals coming from Malibu in the Pacific Ocean all the way north into Los Padres and Angeles National Forests.
Wow, it's incredible. And, it makes me realize just the dogged work that's happening across the state from entities like your conservancy and your folks to actually get these projects done. And that's what we really want to lift up with 30 by 30 and really achieve through 30 by 30 is what are these regional opportunities to actually restore habitat, connect habitat in the age of climate change, protect biodiversity before these different types of plants and animals become endangered, all the while finding ways to expand outdoor access and recreation while combating climate change. So Rory, thanks for giving us a couple of really good examples of the work we're doing to preserve biodiversity.
My pleasure.
So really then finally, I'd want to bring up just the work that we're doing, strengthening our own agency. And it's really looking inward or looking in the mirror and realizing that we can do more to ensure that our workforce reflects the breadth, the diversity of California. And we're working toward that end. We're working to deepen and improve the outreach and engagement that we do with communities across the state. We're working to strengthen tribal partnerships and learn from tribal governments and communities around what we need to be doing to steward our environment. And then lastly, as we move into a new headquarters building viewed here in the slide, is coming back from the pandemic in a different way. We're going to be providing more flexibility for many of our workers to have a hybrid workplace where they're coming into the office to collaborate with colleagues and to get work done, but they're also being able to work remotely and work from home. Really part of what the governor envisions to be a new workplace that makes California state government an employer of choice. And on these efforts, I'm really glad to welcome to the screen two of my colleagues who have actually made history in that they serve as the first ever assistant secretary at our agency for equity and environmental justice. Welcome, Moises Moreno Rivera, and serving as the first ever assistant secretary for tribal affairs, Geneva E.B. Thompson. And I'm really gratified to be part of the team that recruited you into the agency to really institutionalize the priorities I just mentioned. And I want to start with you, Moy. You know, you've worked in communities and other agencies in government. So just want to hear from you at the highest level what you're focused on in 2022, really partnering with me and others to institutionalize equity and environmental justice.
Gracias. Buenas tardes, Secretary Crowfoot, and everyone who's on the panel and everyone who's joining us. You know, these past months, I just want to say thank you to all of the employees and community leaders that have met with me. Just very excited for everyone who's working passionately to reduce barriers to create equitable opportunities for all Californians. You know, our agency has worked on increasing our investments in vital community infrastructure, you know, really providing funding exclusively for coastal water quality projects, to providing technical assistance to communities in need. We know at agency that we could do more on this front. So last year, we kicked off internal working groups to address how we can improve to be more reflective of the California of today, filled with diversity in peoples and perspectives. And we have made contributions on this front. You know, therefore, a major goal for this year is to build on the work and align these efforts to bring all of our agency entities in an intentional, coordinated effort. This means that we need to create the necessary internal equity and environmental justice infrastructure to support and strengthen our work with our agency and our community partners. This also means increasing workforce equity and recruitment, hiring and retention and promotion, improving public participation and outreach and engagement. When we say that, we also mean that this also means working to improve ways to include non-traditional community partners. Who are those community leaders that could really connect us to a broader range of community partners? And you know, ultimately, we also are working and will work to improve increasing access, language access to services and resource. You know, Secretary, you know, to kind of close out, we at agency understand that we cannot do this work alone. And I welcome the opportunity to work and collaborate with our community partners and our employees to build and align on this work.
Huge thanks, Moy. You know, we're working, we've acknowledged the challenges and the fact that, you know, we are working to transform an institution to reflect these values more than ever. And recognize that institutionalizing that is a significant undertaking. So appreciate your leadership on that. And as you know, you have my commitment to drive forward in an aggressive way. Geneva, welcome to the conversation. If you could just talk about what you'll be focused on in the next year, strengthening tribal partnerships.
Yes, thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, and OCO, and greetings, everyone. You know, I think here at the agency, it's really important that we, you know, continue to acknowledge that California Native American tribes have been and continue to be the original stewards of the lands and waters within California. And I think this acknowledgement paired with the really impactful action of Governor Newsom apologizing to California Native American tribes really fits nicely in what we're trying to do in our priorities here at the agency. Governor Newsom had in his call to action for state agencies to discuss and acknowledge the truth of the state's historical wrongs, but also to really take meaningful action to address those harms and find a path towards healing. And that's how I really start to think about and frame how we at agency are strengthening partners with tribal nations. Of course, that work is much easier said than done. But I think in one way that we really can start that healing process is to communicate with tribes and work towards building trust and identifying opportunities to collaborate and strengthen those partnerships. And so, the mechanism that we can use on the state side to start these conversations is really to engage in meaningful, early and often government-to-government consultations. And a huge priority that I have is to make sure that these consultations are not just checking a box, but is really to put in the effort to connect and make a space where meaningful collaborations and discussion on a wide variety of topics can happen, and having that space for that partnerships can grow and strengthen. Another great policy area that I'm really excited about is the implementation of Governor Newsom's Ancestral Lands policy. This policy sets out a spectrum of ways where the state can partner with tribes as it relates to state lands. The governor has asked us to find opportunities to increase tribal access and code management of state lands, and to identify opportunities to return excess state lands to the local tribes. And so it's an exciting policy direction, and I really think that the implementation of this policy can have so many benefits and really meets a lot of the priorities that you listed out, including our goal of reaching outdoors for all, as well as ensuring that tribal expertise is really at the forefront of land management. So, that's just a quick snapshot. I'm really excited for the new year, and whatever.
That's really helpful. And I'm really proud that we've already got examples of tribal ancestral land return. And as you and I talk a lot about, we want to actually provide many more examples. In other words, a lot more proactive projects in partnership with tribes to recognize and to lift up and to partner with their historic leadership. So thanks, Moy. Thanks, Geneva. Greatly appreciate your leadership. So that was a fast journey through what I would distill as key priorities that drive our work in the agency. And I have to say, I'm really, really optimistic based on the folks we have across the state working on these issues. If we could bring up the last slide. And that is to thank you for the work that you all do. We're joined by about 350 people here today. And as I've been looking at the Q&A and the comments coming in, really broad range of folks on the ground doing this work, interested in different communities, different aspects of the work. But frankly, we're one government agency, and we're only able to accomplish so much. I'm proud of what we focused on, but we are not going to achieve progress on any of these priorities without partnership to you all. So a thanks from our team, which is pictured in this photo on a recent outing to see some of that salmon restoration project on the American River. To you, huge thanks. And if you have suggestions or questions, feedback, please use that email address, and we will be responsive. In the remaining time here, getting questions in to us about various aspects of our work. And Aaron asks about climate resilience being considered in the context of coasts and oceans. And I want to share that within our agency is an entity called the Ocean Protection Commission, or I should say Council, OPC. And the OPC, I actually have the privilege of chairing the OPC. And we have a whole team within our secretary's office focused on driving this work forward. And the Ocean Protection Council has a strategic plan which is essentially our strategy to protect the oceans and coasts in California. And one of the core priorities there is to build the climate resilience of the coast, both coastal communities and our coastal ecosystems. And beyond that, I'm really excited that we have unified across state agencies to develop a set of principles that are guiding our planning in response to sea level rise. So if a good place to start would be to check out OPC's strategy around protecting the coast and ocean, and you'll hear more from us in coming months. Zach asked a question around incorporating the climate issues of the Sierra Nevada with the needs of underserved through both throughout the San Joaquin Valley and the Eastern Sierra. In other words, the way I take that question, or how I'd answer, is we cannot compartmentalize environmental work or environmental resilience from the work serving people and communities. At the end of the day, it's about people and nature thriving together. You know, we have a quote at the bottom of our new building that says, "Nature is not a place that you visit, it is home." And that's a quote from the poet laureate, Gary Snyder. And point to make here is that all of this work on climate resilience, yes, it needs to be focused on environmental resilience and focused on the resilience of people and communities. And if Angie had time, she'd tell you about some really interesting investments that her conservancy is making in the Sierra Valley, focused on outdoor education that's both preserving land, but also supporting a venue for outdoor education for underserved communities from throughout the Sierra Nevada. Vicky makes a point, says, good focus on the outdoors and getting people access to the outdoors, but not enough emphasis on nature. Important to get people out into nature, not only the outdoors. Really good point. When we talk about the parks that Armando mentioned and ball fields and playgrounds, super important for, you know, our mental and emotional and physical health, but truly not nature in some respects, or at least in that sort of pure unfettered nature. So we agree that it's important to get people that can't actually access our coast, our broad state parks, actually beyond just their neighborhood playgrounds into nature. All sorts of fascinating scientific research about the benefit of getting people into nature for those people. And then maybe in our final minute, really challenging question on how will the state be evaluating, monitoring, and adapting our co-management actions within the context of climate change. So in other words, really, you know, we have this set of overlapping challenges that we face given these climate impacts. How are we going to be managing and I'd say adaptively managing our efforts? And I would say our climate adaptation strategy is really helpful in this respect. It provides essentially an umbrella strategy and what I call 6 North Star priorities that should drive all of our actions, including prioritizing the most vulnerable communities, really pinpointing the health impacts of climate change. And so that's really meant to inform our different sectoral efforts on wildfire, on drought, on sea level rise, but also make sure we're keeping perspective and focused on actually what's most important. And we update that strategy on an every 3-year basis. And so we're excited to be spending these historic investments thanks to the governor and the legislature, but we know we need to assess whether those investments achieve what we want to and adaptively manage over time. I come to this work in a super excited and energetic and humble way. I'm privileged to learn from my colleagues every day and from you all. Once again, huge thanks for your interest in our work at the agency. If you're somebody who works here, thank you for getting the work done. And if you're somebody who has suggestions around how we can do the work with you better, please let us know. We very much have an open door for any and all ideas how we can continue to make progress on these shared priorities. Once again, huge thanks for your time. Happy New Year, and have a safe and productive rest of the week and month and year. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.